Start your show now, press 1. To hear important instructions, press 2. To speak to customer service, press 3.
How do you plan your race day on the day of the 500, 600?
Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Blog Talk Radio.
Now, from the world's most famous beach, from where beach racing began, it's the Legends of Racing radio show. Live from racing's North Turn Beach Bar and Grill in Ponce Inlet, Florida. The Legends of Racing radio show. And your host, Buz McKim.
Thank you, my loyal subjects. I appreciate that so much. Yes, here we are at the racing...
And verbs.
And verbs, yes. And we are broadcasting again here this week from the North Turn Restaurant in beautiful Ponce Inlet, Florida.
I like the shirt so much, I wore it again this week.
It's very impressive. Very nice, yes. And anyway, we were checking to see if those were his real eyes because the eyes do match the shirt. And we wonder if he wore a green shirt, green eyes. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chameleon?
A
stand-up chameleon? That's it? Yeah. Okay.
All righty then. Hey, you know, probably the biggest thing going on now is the speculation floating around about NASCAR being for sale after 70 years since it was founded by Bill France Sr. And I think everybody has an opinion. Everybody has what they think is a solution. So of all the writers across the country, maybe even around the world, this fella here and his cohort in crime, Godwin Kelly, are probably as close to ground zero in this situation as anyone. So I think it would be really fascinating to get your opinion on where do you think how did we get to this point and how do we crawl out of it?
Where are we and how did we get here? That's a good question. I don't know. Let's move. No, there are so many tentacles to this. So many possibilities. And word came out this, last week that, they've contacted a broker to try to see if there's interest out there from somebody to buy NASCAR, which is weird because you're not buying property. If real estate is location, and I forget the third one.
Yeah, I think it might be
location. Yeah. What is it if you're buying something that's akin to a marketing company or I don't know. I don't know who buys it. What do they do with it? And what are you buying if you buy it? A lot of weird questions. Do they put the speedways up for sale too? Do they throw them into the package? Do they, I don't know. I just think that it's going to happen, and it's going to happen soon because they can't have this cloud hanging over. You can't have this hanging over your sport for any length of time because it's not good for anybody. And when I say anybody, I mean the people who make, count, and dole out the money is what I'm talking about. That's you can't. It's not a way to run a business. So they're gonna whatever happens, it's gonna have to happen soon, and I trust that it will happen soon. I almost envision the family. And I always find it's funny when people say the family because I always go back. It's like The Godfather, the 5 families, and when they talk about the family, I could never envision them giving up any or all of their racetracks, and if they did, certainly not the Daytona Speedway. I could almost envision them keeping the Speedway and selling off the rest of ISC's holdings minus the casino in Kansas, the retail center here, one Daytona, and any other ancillary projects that they have or may have.
Now, could you ever see them just selling the NASCAR side of things?
Yeah, well, that's presumably what's for sale is NASCAR, not the tracks, none of that. But it's so convoluted when you get into how do you sell NASCAR and sell it in a way that you're guaranteed to keep your racetracks viable.
Right.
Because if somebody buys NASCAR and says, oh, guess what, we're going to take it to Canada or something. I mean, you're sitting there with all these racetracks, and now what are you going to turn them into from that? So, I mean, it would be done in such a way that you're guaranteed that your racetracks are still viable. I don't know. But, I mean, the big question is how did it get to this point? And everybody has a theory as why the attendance numbers are down, why the TV ratings peaked, came down, and we thought they're going to level off eventually. My theory is that even the worst case scenario, NASCAR could turn into something akin to today's NHRA. Strong, loyal following that makes that a very profitable venture, but it's just it doesn't have the national audience that they used to have, that NASCAR used to have, right. And not the TV presence that NASCAR is accustomed to having. That's to me the worst case scenario. And in that case, you still can watch it every week. You can still go to it when it comes by you. It's just there's just not going to be the amount of money in it as there is now. But for us, what do we care? Because we're not getting any of the money. So for fans, it may not matter what happens. But one of my theories as to why it built through the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, and then leveled, came down, and kept going down, the numbers. And I usually, it's not the type of thing you bring up at many happy gatherings. You don't, as I say, you don't bring this up in polite society very often. But I'm firmly convinced that one of the issues, particularly with TV numbers, why fewer people watch on TV than they used to, is that the danger element is gone to a large degree. When did the TV numbers spike the most? In 2001. Yeah. You had the sense, people watched it because they had a sense, man, these guys are risking life and limb. And there's something compelling about that. That's not to say you need a driver to get badly hurt or killed every year or two. No, and you don't wish that, say that, or think that. But at the same time, they've lost that danger element, which they had to do. There's nobody to blame. They had to have the safety revolution. Mm-hmm. They had to make the tracks and the cars and all the equipment safer, including the Hans device and all that. Had to do it. It's the only human thing to do. But at the same time, the unintended consequence is not as many people watch. If Carl Walenda was walking from one of these condos down here, 20 floors up, 15 floors up, walking on the high wire from one to the other, you'd probably watch, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Either at home on TV or if you were here, you'd sit and watch. If he had a net under him,
yeah.
Who wants to watch if he's got a net under him? It's not. Some people will still watch because they love the beauty of watching a guy being able to do this. But the people who are not hardcore, diehard fans of Carl Walenda or tightrope walking are not going to watch some old man walking a tightrope when the worst that's going to happen is he's going to fall into a net.
Yeah.
So that's my theory that I try not to trot out too often because it makes me look ghoulish, but I'm not trying to. I'm just pointing out the unintended consequence of the safety revolution.
But that's very interesting,
too. That's it. I'm going home.
Okay. Nice having you with us, everybody. Racing, not NASCAR, but all racing was always reactive. They never did anything about safety until they had to or until something came up that they didn't even think about.
Right.
Well, after 2001, they became extremely proactive. They started the R&D center. They looked at every single possible thing that could go wrong except for somebody running into the jet dryer. Right. But they have it covered. I don't know what else.
I mean, but you would still see, up until recently, you still would see a car hit a concrete wall.
Yeah.
And they'd go, well, we never thought, all of our engineers and all of our surveying and studying and watching and going back through history never suspected that we'd need to cover this with safer barrier. Well,
exactly.
You could leave 3 feet of a 2.5-mile track exposed. Given time, somebody's going to hit that 3-foot section of concrete wall. You got it. Yeah. So and remember the big earthen berm there at Pocono several years ago. I think it was Elliott Sadler hit it. They said, well, we never suspected. Well, no. It's going to happen eventually. You got to cover all that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I remember when, most recently Kyle Busch at the inside wall here at Daytona, and they obviously redid all that. Last year, the Kansas race, I was sitting at a bar, go figure, sitting at a bar with televisions and kegs. As a matter of fact, they had kegs of cold beer.
Congratulations.
And we were watching the Kansas race there were a bunch of TVs on, but one of the TVs had the Kansas race. And it was the wreck where Eric Almirola had to be cut out of the car. And I remember sitting there, and I was with my wife.
Yep.
My wife.
Your wife. Okay.
I try to stick with her.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so,
Good.
I said, this is incredible. I said, this is something you never see anymore. And she doesn't pay a whole lot of attention. She goes, what do you mean? I said, I can't remember the last time I saw a racer have to be cut out of a car.
Yes.
It just doesn't happen anymore. And my thought was he must have messed up his feet or something, or a foot, and it was maybe wedged in there. But then we find out later it was a compression fracture with his back. But that was odd. I mean, that just tells you you just don't see that anymore. And obviously that's a good thing. But at the same time, when that's an odd occurrence, they got the net under them, and it's just not. I'll still watch.
Sure.
But my wife ain't gonna watch if you add the element of danger. Yeah, you get more people are gonna watch. The casual fan is what you're after. It's like the independent voter. You got to get the casual fan and the independent voter, and you could be president of the United States or NASCAR. Take your pick. I think.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's like a number of years ago when USAC put roll cages on sprint cars. And some of the guys, especially Gary Bettenhausen, was furious. He said, you make them safe, then anybody can drive them. I mean, that was the mentality they had. You're taking away that sense of danger. Sterling Moss, as great as a driver as he was, one of the best in history, never wore a seatbelt. He said, we're in it for the danger, and you take the danger away, and there's no reason to even do it.
He was nuts, by the way.
He was nuts, yeah. He certainly was. Yeah, wow. We're more enlightened nowadays.
See, I never knew that.
That's true. You can look it up.
Not Sterling Marlin, but Sterling Moss.
Sterling Moss, right.
Yeah.
But, some of these guys that raced out here on the beach in the 50s, I mean, they were Spartan-type folks, no fire suits, little helmets with leather sides made out of paper. And they had carbon tet fire extinguishers, which is one of the most deadly kind of fire extinguisher you could possibly have. Everybody had a carbon tet fire extinguisher mounted on the floor.
And state-of-the-art stuff was that when they came up with that spray that they would spray their shirts with.
Yeah, right.
It was supposed to be a fire retardant.
Yeah.
That's cutting edge.
Yeah, buddy. And then they used to dip their fire suits in a boric acid solution, similar to baking soda. And when it dried, it was scratchy and stiff and miserable. Fireball Roberts was allergic to it. He couldn't even wear a fire-resistant uniform. So we've come a long way, and it's simply amazing. But those guys were abnormally brave, the guys that raced out here, just totally nuts. And whenever they wore those little leather helmets back in the day, back in the 20s and teens and all that, that was only to keep the sand out of their hair. It wasn't going to protect anything. Yeah, but it looked cool in the pictures, though. Right?
Well, there's a school of thought, when the NHL, when hockey made helmets mandatory.
Right.
I mean, you watch a hockey game and you can't imagine playing without a helmet. But you look at some of the old footage, and there was, if you did not wear a helmet, you were grandfathered in. And there was I want to say it was Craig McTavish, I think was his name. But he was the last NHL player that didn't wear a helmet because he came into the league after or before it was mandatory. But there was a school of thought, and there's still some who will tell you that the game became more dangerous when the guys put on helmets because now they're not as afraid.
Right.
And they're, by the same token, there's some people out there. Now, granted, it's not a large block of the electorate, but there's some people out there when you talk about concussions in the NFL or all football, say take the helmets away, or go back to leather helmets that only protect certain part of the head, because if these guys don't have protection on their head, they're not going to lead with their head. They're going to be a little more cautious, a little more respectful of the other guy's head.
There you go.
And but then look at rugby.
Yeah,
no helmets, and I don't think they have the concussion problem that a lot of other sports have.
That's true.
But I don't know. I'm not going out there without a helmet on.
So how would you clean up?
I barely sit in the stands without a helmet on.
So how do you clean up Australian rule football?
Used to watch it. Remember that used to be in the early days of ESPN.
Yes.
They didn't have a lot of programming, so you would see. They used to have arm wrestling arm wrestling professional tournaments, but they used to show that Aussie rules football all the time.
I could never figure it out.
And it was classic. It was it was cool to watch because of the officials they looked like flashers. Remember they had the long coats on, and they'd do that thing. Yeah, that was fun back then. You watch it for a few minutes. You wouldn't spend a day around it. But Australian rules football. That's another thing you don't see anymore.
Yeah.
Know what else you don't see anymore? Wide World of Sports and the old figure 8 races.
Oh yeah. Good old figure 8.
I was explaining that to somebody. I looked it up the other day. Islip Speedway, I think it was, a raceway in New York.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the old figure 8 races.
Yep.
Every now and then you're a kid. I remember, Wide World of Sports. They'd say, today we're going to have downhill skiing from Copenhagen, the men's downhill. We're going to check in at the they would have a track and field event, the Penn Relays. Yeah. And then later we're going to go to Islip Speedway for the figure 8 race.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, you get about 20 minutes of figure 8 racing.
Well,
and I always said, bring back figure 8 racing.
I love it.
And Jimmy Spencer would be Richard Petty if they had figure 8 racing.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, it wasn't just figure 8. It was the World Championship figure 8.
Oh, well, I'll be damned. Color me corrected.
Yeah, there you go.
There's something you could add
to
today's NASCAR figure 8 series.
Let's give it a shot. What do we have to lose, right? Yeah,
figure 8.
Yeah,
or bring in Jack Briscoe and have the figure 4 series. It's an old wrestling reference right there.
Well, you know Jack Briscoe.
Okay.
Yeah, wasn't he from Nutley, New Jersey?
Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Jack and
right.
Jerry Briscoe.
Okay, all right. I like the bad guys that were from Parts Unknown. You remember that? Yeah.
Parts Unknown. That was a crowded area. That I tell you what, that produced more wrestlers than any other area.
Right.
Was Parts Unknown.
Yeah, always the bad guys too.
Yes.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be mayor of that town.
I was trying to explain to somebody the other day when I was a little kid watching Gordon Soley wrestling in Florida. There was a little tag team that used to get beat all the time. They were just the tackling dummies.
Yeah.
They were the masked medics. They had the white mask and a little red cross on there. And they never beat anybody.
Oh man, that's crazy. They were the Herman Beam.
Oh yes, Herman the Turtle Beam.
Yeah, we'll get into Herman Beam right after this commercial break.
The caution flag is out. Time for a break. We'll be right back with the Legends of Racing radio show. Welcome to Homewood Suites by Hilton in Daytona Beach. You're right in the middle of all the action. Daytona International Speedway, the airport, One Daytona, Florida's newest entertainment and retail destination, and of course, the world's most famous beach. You'll love our newly remodeled 1- and 2-bedroom suites, along with our popular King Studios. You won't need your full kitchen, as Homewood Suites Daytona serves up complimentary breakfast and evening social. It's like home away from home. Go to HomewoodDaytona.com for Homewood Suites by Hilton in Daytona Beach. We're back from where it all began, racing's original North Turn Beach Bar and Grill. The Legends of Racing radio show continues with your host, Buz McKim.
Thank you, folks. And, just before we broke that time, we were talking about Herman the Turtle Beam, and he's one of the real colorful characters of the sport. And maybe that's something that we're missing today, too, is colorful characters.
The caboose, basically, a guy who can go out there and just turn every lap, keep it out of trouble, and make expenses.
Yeah, that's right. Well, he still holds the record for the most races without a DNF. He finished more races than any other driver in a continuous deal. But he was known as Herman the Turtle because he always ran around the bottom of the track. He was very, very conservative with his equipment. His equipment was always beautiful. He was a brilliant guy. He was a chemical engineer out of Tennessee, and he wanted to go racing real bad, and that's exactly how he went racing.
That's a moonshiner, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what a Tennessee chemical engineer is, a moonshiner.
That's right. Yeah. But, one time he fired Cal Yarbrough for driving too fast. He was running at Nashville, and Herman told him how to race, where to be, how to drive. And Cal was involved in a terrible accident and tore the car up. And old Herman was furious because he said, if you had driven the car the way I told you to, you would not have been in that spot at that time.
How'd that work out?
Yeah, right. I think Cal went on to bigger and better things, yes. Yeah, but, we do need some more colorful characters.
Sure.
I think that wouldn't hurt.
Nobody's going to argue with that.
That's exactly. Now, as a writer, do you remember when racing peaked and then it started its downward slide? Can you kind of remember when the bottom kind of fell out or started to fall out?
You can't. Well, I think it didn't happen. There was no one moment where the number. Well, you're talking about where it peaked, like around through say 2005. The numbers, and we speak strictly speaking of TV numbers,
right?
Because that's where the money is. Yeah. And you look at those Nielsen ratings every week. That's where the billions of dollars are. And it didn't happen. There was no one thing that happened. I think it just gradually after the Earnhardt deal and all the attention and all these people started watching and then more people started watching, and you still had Jeff Gordon going great guns. You had Junior out there, and Harvick came along in Earnhardt's place. You had a lot of characters, a lot of personality.
Yep.
And so a lot of people were watching, and a lot of those people didn't have roots in the sport. They were not generational race fans. They were first-generation race fans.
Yep.
Then over time, they realized, now I think what happened was, over time, a lot of those first-generation race fans realized after a period of time that, wow, every race does not look like they do in the commercials.
Yeah.
Because you're watching a promo for a race that's coming up, and, man, it's 3 wide, there's spinning, there's flames, and, there's side-by-side finish, the Kurt Busch and Ricky Craven at Darlington. Finish. And then over time, people realize it's not always like this. Sometimes I got to wait a few hours for it to get to that part. Now, the second, third generation race fans, they're fine with waiting, because they just know that's the ebb and flow of it. But I think a lot of the people the casual fans who came along in 01, 2, and 3, and 4, a lot of them people eventually backed out because they realized they moved on to something else. I don't know what else. But, yeah.
Yep.
So, I think that's what happened, but it didn't happen at one time. It slowly happened.
Yeah.
But even then, the numbers remained great. They remained great enough to get 2 subsequent TV network contracts.
Big dollars.
Big ones, like I think in 08 and again in 15 or 07 and 15. There were, 2 more big TV contracts came, and they got bigger each time. And who knows, the next one might be even bigger because – everything's relative. I mean, the numbers, when they signed this most recent one, the numbers weren't what they were the previous time they had a contract renewal, but they still got more money because live television, networks with live television or with TV time to sell, live sports is where it's at. Live sports. And why is that? Because sitcoms and TV dramas and whatever, people can watch them later.
That's right.
And what do? They fast forward through the commercials. If you're watching a ball game or a race live, you can't fast forward through the commercials. So that's where the money is for TV because they know they got the captive audience. Nobody's fast forwarding through the commercials. So that's why live sports remains a big moneymaker for everybody. I mean, nobody comes close to the NFL, and nobody beyond that comes close to college football. But after that, baseball still makes a lot. NHL even makes a lot of money. PGA Tour, they all make the bulk of their money from TV, even though the numbers are a pittance compared to just a run-of-the-mill NFL game.
Yeah. No,
so, I mean, a run-of-the-mill NFL game will get a 5 rating, and I think Talladega got a 1.7 or something, or 1.9. Dover got a 1.7. PGA golf tournament, if Tiger Woods is in the hunt on Sunday, it might get a 4. But if he's not playing, it's going to get a 1.5. And a Sunday night NFL game is going to get a 10.
Well, to sponsorship, team sponsorship. Will those folks look at the TV ratings, or will they look at the attendance? And because you're not playing to that many live fans. And in real time, but they are getting a lot of TV time. Which way would they look, you think? Would attendance dropping affect the sponsorship?
I think, it'll go on a case-by-case, driver-by-driver, and it depends on the product or the package they put together. I mean, the money that the sponsors, I'm not telling you anything you don't need to know. But the money that the sponsors, that a Tide or a Borax or a Folgers, the money they give a race team for Kenny Schrader or Kyle Larson or whoever, they're not giving them that money just so their name and logo and colors are on the car every Sunday.
Right.
They have a whole other marketing campaign based around that team and that driver. They get that driver for X amount of days per year for events. He comes to the annual convention. He does several autograph signings for them. They use them in commercial shoots, print advertising, magazines, online stuff, whatever. So they have a whole marketing package when they give a race team this money. And you can't say, I guess it's on a driver by driver basis as to how much is out there and who's getting what.
Yeah, interesting. I got a great sponsorship story from back in the early days. There's a fella from right outside of Charleston, South Carolina, named Curtis Crawfish Kreider. And the old Crawfish, he ended up moving back down here to Daytona, and he raced on the local tracks for a number of years, but very kind of a colorful guy in his own way. And he came down for the 1960 Firecracker 250, which is now the Pepsi 400, and he had a 58 Ford that he'd already been racing for about a season and a half, and everything but, I think, the transmission was dented. And it looked like you wouldn't want to drive in it to go down the street to get a gallon of milk. So he pulled up in front of Whataburger, which used to be over here on Ridgewood, and he's got the thing on a tow bar. Couldn't afford a trailer. So the manager comes out and he says, "You going to race that thing this weekend at the track?" And Curtis said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, what would it cost me to get my name on the side of your car?" And Curtis said, $200. He said, "Great." He said, "You put my name on the car, I'll give you $200. So he went down to a hardware store, picked up a brush, and a little can of white paint, painted Whataburger on both quarters, because that's how you sold it. Quarter sections were sold as a pair, but the guy at Whataburger didn't know that. He, pulled up in front of the Whataburger, and the guy said, "Man, that is fantastic. What would it cost to have my name on the other side of the car?" Curtis said, "Oh, another $200. He said, "Okay." So old Curtis got in his truck, drove down the road, sat there for about a half hour, came back up, parked in the other direction. The guy gave him $400 cash. Big-time sponsorship in the early days of NASCAR.
Oh, cool. That'd buy a valve stem today, I think.
That's right. Yeah.
Anybody else hungry? Whataburger, man. All that Whataburger talk.
Let's go. Yeah. Yes, sir. But, it is a bit of kind of a quandary right now. There's a lot of factors involved, and you wonder, which one is going to start healing itself first.
Well, I think they need to get it to the point where the teams are not so dependent on sponsorship money. And I don't know what's going to take to do that, because unless you have Rob Kaufman, who owns the 43 team, the Petty car, that team, he has talked about spending limits, which is what would do for racing what salary caps do for the team sports.
Wow.
If you have a spending limit and it can be policed, then you can make the sport viable. I was thinking today, when's the last time a new owner and team came along and was worth anything?
Yeah, that's right.
It's next to impossible for a new team to get in, a new owner to get in and run up front. It just doesn't happen, and it should not be that way. I'm not sure how you fix it, but I know that it should not be that way. And that's another one. When I said there's 100 reasons, to me, that's another one of the 100 reasons is there's not any new ownership blood coming in, and with different ideas.
Right.
And, the only new ownership blood has been when a Rob Kaufman or a John Henry or a George Gillette comes in and buys a financial stake in a team. But that's not the same as somebody starting up a new team with a...
Right.
Yeah. So.
Well, one thing through this, over the last week and a half or so since we've heard about the possible, looking at a sale, we haven't heard anything from the drivers' organization or from the owners' organization, and they've been mum on almost every subject for quite a long time, and I wonder, I'm sure they still exist, but there's nothing coming out of those corners.
I don't have an answer for that.
Okay. And the folks we know that are involved won't talk to us.
That's right. Yeah. I don't know. But we'll find out. I know that.
Yeah.
And I'll go back to, I'll say it again. It's whatever's going to happen, it's going to happen fast. It needs to.
That's true. Yeah, and you just wonder if the whole thing has been kind of undermined since the news have come out about the, looking around for a new sponsor. Is it going to kind of erode the confidence in the organization?
Well, I think when they said that they're not going to, after next year, they're going to get away from that business model of having a title sponsor for the entire series.
Right.
Winston Cup, Nextel Cup, Sprint Cup, Monster Energy. When they say they're going to get away from that, I think that's smart, because that takes away the possibility of going through what they just went through, what they went through 2 years ago.
Right.
They can't find a title sponsor. They haven't announced one. They should have announced one by now, and that makes you look bad.
Yeah,
that's so why put yourself through it if you can perhaps get the same amount of money in a different way?
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
the trick, though, is getting that money in a different way. I don't have that answer either.
And I don't think a GoFundMe page is going to do it, right?
No, bake sale.
That's right.
NASCAR bake sale. Those AmeriCrown brownies are pretty damn good. You could get $1 a shot for them, I'm sure, on the street corner. So.
Well, we have an opportunity to shed a little bit of light on one of our lovely sponsors, so we're going to break away for just a minute.
The caution flag is out. Time for a break. We'll be right back with the Legends of Racing radio show. Racing's original North Turn is our broadcast headquarters. If you're looking for a good drink, great entertainment, and the best in food, they're right on the beach at Racing's original North Turn. Rhonda and Walt invite you to come on down to dinner tonight. Here are a couple of testimonials. These are actual testimonials from people who have enjoyed the North Turn. Been there many times, always great food and drinks, great location on the beach. And another, what a great experience. It's my new favorite restaurant in the Daytona Beach area, Racing's original North Turn on South Atlantic Avenue. That's A1A in Ponce Inlet, about 3.2 miles south of the Dunlawton Bridge and A1A intersection. It's Racing's original North Turn, a restaurant, museum, bar, gift shop, live music. That's Racing's North Turn. Racing's North Turn has been voted by you top 10 beach bar 7 years in a row. Next year, they're going for top 5.
That's nuts.
We're back from where it all began. Racing's original North Turn Beach Bar and Grill. The Legends of Racing radio show continues with your host, Buz McKim.
Thank you very much, folks. Good to be back. We got Ken Willis, the bedazzled and, well, you're not bespectacled, are you? But
No, when I read, I need those 1.75 readers.
Yeah.
That is my
There you go.
one bragging point to this at this age is that I have not had to go up to the 2.0 readers yet.
Very good.
I'm
very
staying
good.
below 2.0 if it kills me.
Okay, but he is beloved, though.
That.
I got a question for
I'll
you.
start squinting if I have to.
Now, you haven't been to Iowa lately, have you? No, like in the
Is,
last week or
is
so?
forever considered lately?
Okay, yeah, I haven't been
I
there
don't
either.
think I've been to or through Iowa. I don't think I have.
Well, the other day...
It's nothing personal.
No. But in your illustrious publication, in the general news section, they arrested some fella for trying to perform a sex act on a race car. No, not a race car.
Oh,
a
an
car.
automobile. Yes,
Yeah,
an
an
automobile.
automobile. Yeah, he had this thing about the tailpipe, and he blew a 0.34 alcohol, and they think there might have been a few drugs involved. He was
a
out
lot
there-
of drinking.
Yeah, a lot of drinking, and it was they found him under the car, buck naked, as they say in the South.
Yeah.
And they had to tase him. And he put up a bit of a fight, too. He really loved this car. So I didn't know if you or anybody you knew had been out there lately.
No.
Okay.
I had a 71 Chevy pickup through college
Right.
that I loved.
Oh, did you? You really loved it?
But I drew the line. I drew the line right there. Right?
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Good to know. Well, what was the
Loved
first...
it like a brother.
Oh, good. Okay. What was the first race you ever covered as a scribe?
I believe it was the 80. I was part-time at the paper. I was working part-time, but I think it was the 82 firecracker, or as Richard Petty always calls it, the July race.
The July race.
The July race in 82, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
And then back there in 83 for the 500.
Okay. 100.
HUNNERD, the
That's right.
500.
Hey, a little interesting factoid about Richard.
Yeah.
Do you know that he was born on the very same day that Amelia Earhart disappeared? July 2nd.
You don't say.
Honest to God. July 2nd, 1937. He was coming, she was going.
You are just full of information.
I knew it would come in handy someday, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, my wife
Wow.
said I'm full of something there, but yeah. So you've seen a bundle of changes since she first came on board, right?
Amelia Earhart. I'm still trying to get my head wrapped around that. That's something. Yeah, I have. Everybody who's been here for any length of time has seen that thing evolve.
Yeah.
Yeah, it used to be pretty Spartan. I do miss driving through the Turn 4 tunnel, though. I miss that. And I like every so often I still get a chance to go through that.
Yeah.
The old tunnel, and and back in the good old days when it would leak.
Yeah. Oh,
A
yeah.
little puddle of water down below.
Yes, sir.
And do you remember when they built the Turn 1 tunnel about 10 years ago?
Mm-hmm. I sure do.
Do you remember that the day after it first officially opened on that Speed Weeks, do you remember the jackhammers that were out there the second day?
That's right.
Yeah, they had to. They did not. They had the. You couldn't get an 18-wheeler going in to the track, entering the tunnel, had to swing way out into the left lane, and which meant nobody could be coming the other way. And when it was built, the track said, that's a bunch of crap. It's fine. It's wide enough." Then they realized it wasn't, and the next day they had the jackhammers out there. Also, there was a story that Bill Jr., it was apparently that Turn 1 tunnel was the one time that the Speedway Corporation Board of Directors went against Bill Jr.'s wishes.
Heavens.
Strong wishes. He did not want another tunnel built. And he said, you're going to be sorry. It's not going to withstand it. It's not, the track can't handle it. It's not, you're going to be sorry. And they built the tunnel, and I think it was, well, I tell you when it was. I think it was 2004 when we had the 3 hurricanes in a row. And the tunnel was so full of water. And the track was weeping. Water's coming. And they said he never said, I told you so, because he didn't have to. But they had to pump all that water out. I was one of the guys that was around back then was telling me the story recently, and I've forgotten a lot of the details, but I just sat there with my jaw dropped for a while because he was telling me how bad it was and how close they came to him being right.
Yeah.
And they were deathly afraid. And then they had the pothole.
Oh,
and they were going, oh, my God, he was right. We shouldn't have built this tunnel. They blamed it on the tunnel when it wasn't the tunnel's blame. And, so that was
it was tough when Bill Jr. was right.
Yeah, I bet it was.
It was tough, yeah.
I bet it was.
That's for sure.
I was going to say, he liked me because you were asking me if I found him intimidating. I didn't. And part of the reason was he liked me because fairly early on, I forget how early on, we were just found ourselves in the same area. We were talking about this, that, or the other, about world events. And he discovered that, and I'll never forget the look on his face, he discovered that he and I shared political views.
Wow.
And he looked at me like he was stunned because he figured somebody from the newspaper world must not share his political views. And he was stunned. And from that day forward, he always was nice to me.
Wow.
Now, unless he was pissed about something. He would, because if you remember, they ran the Indy Racing League, ran that 1-day or 2-day test out here back around. It was obviously before he died, so it was back in 05, 06.
That's right.
And they ran a test. The IRL, and Danica was part of that at the time. Yeah. And it was a joke. Cars wouldn't go out on the track. They'd go out there and they'd turn a slow lap. Danica was supposed to come in at the lunch break for media availability. The local TV affiliates were all there from Orlando, Jacksonville. A lot of press people were there because, she was a big name. This was after she had led the Indy 500. So she was a big name. She was there for the test with all the other IRL teams. Well, she stands us up. She doesn't come in. Because they said they were working on her seat. They were trying to get her fitted for the seat. And because their season hadn't started yet. This was early in the year. They were getting ready, I think, to go to Sebring for an official preseason test.
Right.
And that just drove me crazy because I said, can you imagine NASCAR having a test session here? And by the way, Jimmy Johnson is coming in at lunch and him not showing up. Can you imagine?
Not good.
Yeah, they would never stand for that.
No.
So I kind of remember just ripping them in the paper the next day. That night we had one of them cold tailpipe dinners, and we had one of the Indy Racing League drivers come to it as our guest. Right. And the Indy Racing League media relations manager set that up for me. Then the next day, our papers, IRL's a joke. What a rinky-dink operation that they don't make her come to the media center. You've got all this publicity sitting there waiting for you, and they just don't follow through.
They didn't do it the NASCAR way.
The next day I remember seeing the media guy, and it was drawing a blank on his name. He worked for NASCAR before he went over to IRL.
Andy Hall?
Graham, right? Not Graham.
Nope.
Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
He, Phillips? Anyway, I remember him looking at me the next day going, and I helped you last night. I helped you, and you did this. But anyway, the Sunday prior to that test was on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Monday, Tuesday. The Sunday paper, I did a big story on the last time Indy-style race cars were on Daytona.
Bad.
Yeah, it didn't end well. No. That was in 60? 59, the first year.
Yep.
I think it was in March or April. April?
Yes,
I'm glad you're here. You're going to correct me on that. And they had 2 100-mile races in the Indy cars because they were shaking them down, making sure everything would be good because the Firecracker 400 in July, the 250,
that's right.
That was going to be an IndyCar race. But what happened was on toward the end of the first 100-mile USAC race, IndyCar race, in April of 59, they had a bad wreck, and George Amick.
George Amick.
Bill Amick was a local golf course architect.
Okay.
George Amick wrecked, killed
Yep.
And they said these cars just can't run on this track.
Yeah, then Marshall Teague was killed in the IndyCar in practice in February of that year, too.
That's right.
Bad deal.
So that's when they realized this isn't a good idea, and Big Bill hustled and put together a second stock car NASCAR race for July.
That's right.
Yeah, and that's how the Firecracker 400 was born.
Well, see, one of the problems, I was fortunate enough to talk to Roger Ward before he passed away, and I asked him about that race, and he said the problem was the cars were so light and so fast that they would actually get airborne coming off the second turn.
That's not
and,
good.
He said it scared us bad, and he said the tires were over a year old. They had run at Monza, Italy, and he said they were rock hard, and we didn't call them Firestones, we called them Flintstones. He said we realized that this was not a good thing to do.
Not conducive to a safe race. But anyway, on Monday morning, I think the test was later in the week because the next day I got a call from Bill Jr.'s secretary, Jerry.
Yeah.
And she said, Mr. France would like to speak with you.
Oh, boy.
And that was the only time he was irritated with me. And as it turned out, he said there was really nothing wrong with the story.
Yeah.
Because the story was fine. He said, but that headline and the picture we ran was an aftermath of Amex wreck, the crushed car.
Yeah,
he said, but I don't know why you had to run that picture and the headline because it was like disaster, Daytona disaster, tragedy, death,
Right.
And I had to explain to him what he already kind of knew was that we have nothing to do with the headlines. We don't write the headlines for our own stories, and we don't determine what photos are used. And so it ended with him saying, well, I guess my bitch isn't with you. That was it.
You'll find another victim.
Yeah.
Well, the one thing about NASCAR, though, it's like, why couldn't the IndyCar folks have knuckled down and forced their people to do what they're supposed to do? It wouldn't have happened at NASCAR, and Bill Sr. and Jr. always said that NASCAR was a benevolent dictatorship.
Yeah.
And we're gonna make sure you guys do
if
it
there
right.
is such a thing. Yes.
Yeah, if there is such a thing. Yeah, but it's unfortunate. I'm sure it was a black eye as far as Daytona Speedway
it
was
went a
concerned.
long way in explaining why they were in such a bad way in terms of finding an audience. Because they didn't know how to market it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think they knew how, they just didn't go about it.
Yeah.
It's like when I go out to the golf course, I know how to hit the ball properly. I just can't make myself do it and won't listen to my better judgment.
Yeah. Hey, what would you think if, all right, say they have a race coming up maybe in Richmond, whatever, maybe even this weekend in Kansas. You go ahead and run the race like a Saturday night race where you have qualifying, then you have heats, and then you have a consi, and then you have a feature. What do you think about that?
Well, I think I think you're going to see that sooner than later. I think the stage racing was a compromise for that.
Okay.
There was a lot of people pushing them. Let's have shorter events. Let's pack more into a day at the track. Have heat races. The old fans are used to that would sort of mollify them a little bit to give them heat races because the old fans grew up. They go to New Smyrna and Bithlo and Barberville, and that's what they're used to seeing. And it would be kind of cool. But I don't think they wanted to go that far and didn't want to do it, so somebody came up with the idea of stage racing, which sort of does that in a way, where you're breaking the race up into 3 segments without stopping, and you throw in the caution flag for too many laps, but you're not stopping and going back out an hour later. So I think that the stage racing was a compromise but I do think eventually, probably within the next few years, you will see something of that form where they're having heat races, consolation race, final, maybe knockout rounds, that type of thing.
There you go.
Yeah.
What about all the rule changes, and does NASCAR seem to appear to be too heavy-handed with the way they do things now, and the air gun debacle, and it seems like every week there's something else that's not working out quite right.
Well, yeah, of course. That irritates everybody, and it's almost like a federal bureaucracy. Once you start going down that road, it does not shrink, it does not withdraw, it does not go away. It just grows.
Right. And
so the rule book has done nothing but grow and grow and grow. And I remember, Smokey Yunick used to always say why he loved Indianapolis so much was you could write the rules on a matchbook. There was like 4 rules. You could not have a fuel tank bigger than this. You can't have an engine bigger than this. Your car can't be longer than this or shorter than that. All right, let's go. So that's why he was able to. God, he built that capsule car for God's sake and took it up there. He didn't get in the race, but but at least he made history, and it's still in a museum somewhere. I assume.
Up at
But
Indy.
there should be a way. It boggles the mind of the casual onlooker to think, why do they have rules that slow the cars down? I thought it was racing.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
if you want to slow the cars down on the bigger tracks, you don't want them doing 210, 220 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm no expert, and I couldn't tell you how to do this and all the effects it would have. But it seems to me that smaller engines would do it.
Sure.
And that would lead to other factors that you would have to address, of course. But there are ways to slow the cars down without restrictor plates, and there are ways to run a railroad without a rule book that's that thick.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like one week you didn't have to have all the lug nuts on. The next week you had to. It's like, what?
I think they should take one car. You should, like a Russian roulette. One of the cars has one lug nut. We're not going to tell you who. We're not going to tell them who. Go get them.
I like it. That's
That
fun.
would draw an audience.
It certainly would. Yeah. Well, we're going to break just hold on. You see, you got me all foot-twitched here. Anyway, we're going to have a sponsor break in just a second here. And I promise we're going to come back with more elucidations.
All right.
How's that? Okay.
Whatever that is.
The caution flag is out. Time for a break. We'll be right back with the Legends of Racing radio show. At Beach Boys Embroidery and Tees, it's all about making you happy. Beach Boys Embroidery can customize your athletic golf apparel, caps, hats, badges, buttons, magnets, backpacks, bags, totes, clocks, watches, and of course, T-shirts. Sure, they're at 2033 South Ridgewood Avenue in South Daytona, and they're waiting for you to call now. 386-255-5880. Beach Boys Embroidery and Tees. We're back from where it all began. Racing's original North Turn Beach Bar and Grill. The Legends of Racing radio show continues with your host, Buz McKim.
Thank you so much, folks. We're moving into our last segment for this round of Legends of Racing radio show. And, we talked a little bit about Bill Jr., he tried to get over what the board of directors tried to overrule him on that tunnel, but it was very interesting how it's like, we got to tell him he was right and all that sort of thing. But Bill Sr. was another fellow who would actually admit if he was wrong. We had a friend that worked for NASCAR at the time, back in the early 70s, and he walks into Lynn's office one day and says, "Here, I want you to break down the purse at Talladega into 60 spots." He said, "Why is that?" He said, "Well, we're going to run 60 cars at Talladega this year." And he said, "Well, I'm sorry, Mr. France, but I think you're making a humongous mistake. We've had a lot of problems at Talladega with a lot less cars." He said, "Well, if I wanted your opinion, I'd ask you, and if you can't do this, and you can just hit the door." He said, "Okay, all right, yeah, I'm just telling you." So sure enough, they started 60 cars at Talladega. They had a humongous pile up on the backstretch, wiped out half the field. That was the year that the wreck that Wendell Scott went out of business, basically. It almost killed him. It tore up his brand new Mercury. It was just a mess. So Lynn says, I'm sitting up there in the press box, and he said all of a sudden the tall man, as they called him, he says, he taps me on the shoulder. He said, "We need to go for a ride." He said, "Okay." So I get on down into his station wagon. We go down into the pits. And he said, "I watched Bill write out a check for every one of those wrecked cars." Oh. And he said, "Do me a favor." And Lynn said, "What's that?" He said, "Don't ever tell me I told you so." But he knew that he screwed up. And that story was confirmed by Wendell Scott's widow, Mary, who had told us that Wendell was in the hospital. He was in really bad shape. And Bill Sr. was the first person to come visit him. And he said that on the way out, he gave me a big hug and held my hand and put a big wad of bills in it. And said, "If you need anything, let me know." So Bill realized that he had screwed up and that those guys who are making the show for him every week didn't have to pay that price. I thought that was...
I had never heard that one.
That's a pretty cool story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Yeah. Speaking of characters, how about you had mentioned Smokey Unick.
Yep.
Now, you ran across him a few times, didn't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. He was always fun, wasn't he?
Yes. Except for, toward the end when he was deaf as a doornail, and he used that grease board he'd ride on sometimes for, he had his guy, I'm drawing a blank on the guy who was right-hand man there for many years.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ralph Johnson?
No, Ralph was a mechanic, engineer type guy. I'm talking about like his bookkeeper or secretary guy.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and if it was a phone conversation, I watched this a few times, where he would be on the phone talking to whoever Smokey was supposed to be talking to on the phone, but he couldn't because he's deaf.
Yeah.
And then he would write the question or comment to Smokey, and then Smokey would grab the phone. Rah, 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 rah. And I was in there today that the widow of a fella who used to be in the parts business at Supplied Racers. Mm-hmm. I want to say it was Kenny Weld.
Yes. Yeah, they were very close.
I'm pretty sure it was his widow.
Yeah.
And there was a fellow who was wanting to come back to work for Weld Automotive or whatever it was called. Mm-hmm. And she had called asking Smokey's opinion. Well, the fellow had been run off 10 years earlier for some shenanigans.
Oh, okay.
And Smokey knew that Kenny Weld would have never hired him back. And she was weaker and vulnerable and was thinking, maybe I need this guy to come back, and he's got a sob story. And so all this is going back and forth between Smokey, his man, who's writing the talk to the widow, right down, rah, 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 rah. And then finally he's trying to explain to her why you just can't, if this guy did this to you 10 years ago or 15 years ago, however long, what he did was bad enough that you should never trust him again. Mm-hmm. And I use this all the time, this line all the time, or whenever applicable. Finally, Smokey grabbed a grease board, put it down, he grabbed the phone, and he says, Margaret, or whatever her name was, if you buy a puppy that's brown with tan spots, when that dog gets old and dies, it'll be tan with brown spots. And I went, there you go. That is words of wisdom.
Simple
right there.
Wisdom, yes, sir. Absolutely. Love Smokey. And then there's that old legend, and it's not really a legend, it really happened, when NASCAR was giving him a real hard time on the Chevelle, and they found like 13 or 14 things that he was going to have to change in order to run the Daytona 500 in 1968. Among them, changed the floor pan on the car. So he knew that he was screwed right there. So they had already taken the fuel cell out, and there was no fuel cell in the car. And his deal was, he said that he hopped in the car. He was so mad, he drove the car out through the fourth turn tunnel, drove it all the way down Mason Avenue to his shop. And he said that NASCAR never said how big a fuel line you had to have in the car. He said, I had a 2-inch fuel line in that thing. And he said, not only did I drive it back to the shop, I could have driven the SOB to Jacksonville.
Left the fuel tank sitting on the ground and drove it back,
Magic.
Yep.
Simply magic.
Yep.
Yeah. Somebody like that would be really neat to have in NASCAR now, too. Controversial.
He might have been the first guy to put an inflatable ball in the gas tank, too, right?
Yeah, he certainly was. Yeah. He put inflatable basketball. Yeah,
Yep.
And they checked the tank, and then he'd deflate the ball and fill it up with gas, and hey. Yeah,
because if the ball's taking up a certain amount of room in the tank, you can make a bigger tank.
That's right.
And now you got that ball taking up that big amount of room. Now when you deflate that ball, guess what? You've got an extra gallon or two of gas.
Yep.
In the,
He was always thinking.
But the other guy next to you might have 3. He might have had 2 inflatable balls. In there. Defensive cheating. They call it.
But today, in all forms of motorsport, though, the rules stifle any imagination. And it's really unfortunate. You got cookie-cutter cars on cookie-cutter tracks. Same way with the IRL. Same sort of thing, running the same cars, the same engines, the same chassis, and there's really nothing to spark your interest. Now, granted, the last couple Indy 500s have been very good races.
Oh yeah.
But
well, they do one thing in the Indy racing. They do one thing that NASCAR might want to take a look at: road street races, street course.
Oh, wouldn't that be nice?
Well, I see one going up and down Beach Street.
Yeah,
down
yeah.
Volusia Avenue.
Well, you remember the old L&R series?
No.
No. Okay. Well, Bobby Allison built a prototype for it, and back in the
what a shock! You remember it?
Yeah. He built a little a Buick Regal or something, but it was going to be called the L&R series, meaning left and right. It was a NASCAR series, and they had really looked heavily into this, and they were going to run races on street courses and these, smaller cup cars, and it just never went anywhere. It never got out of the gate, basically. But they had one on display at the Circle Track Trade Show one year over at the Ocean Center, and it was a cool-looking car, and I think the concept would have been a lot of fun.
I would watch that, but I don't think they need to. Be even better if they didn't block off the course. Send them out there with the,
Yeah.
Send them out there with rush hour traffic, or
cool.
a few of our urban outdoorsmen who hang around the Beach Street area downtown.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and on the real tight curves, they can line them with baby carriages with real babies in them. What do you think? Eh? Make it interesting.
You are a ghoul. That's what you are.
Sorry. Oh, well. But, what happens is you get to a point where you're desperate. You want to try something and, give it a shot. What do you have to lose, right?
Street course. Well, they're adding a road course, one more road course to the schedule this year.
The Roval.
Yeah, Charlotte. So, yeah, if they did a street course race, NASCAR, well, maybe the next owners will look into that.
Yes. The first road course race that NASCAR ever had was on the runways of the Linden, New Jersey airport in 1954. Al Keller won it in a Jaguar because they let foreign cars in. Paul Whiteman, the great band leader that we just talked about, he owned the car. And there was a fella in the race named Jay Christopher. So we did a little research, and we found out that Jay Christopher wasn't his real name. He was a fellow who drove a little Jag in the race, and he was a professional musician and an amateur sports car racer. Now, if his sports car club had known that he was in a professional race, he would have lost his amateur standing. So he changed his name to Jay Christopher, which was a combination of his wife and his son's name. And it turned out where the fellow's name was really Conrad Janis, who was a great jazz musician. And if you remember the TV show Mork and Mindy, he played Mindy's father, the bald-headed fella. And I got to talk to him. I interviewed him a few years ago.
My head is spinning.
I said, well, how was the race? He said, oh, my God, those NASCAR guys were ruffians. We were gentlemen race drivers. He said, I'm in my little Jaguar, and here comes a Hudson Hornet. Looks like he's going to run right over the top of me. He said, after about 25 laps, I couldn't handle it anymore, so I just pulled out. How about that?
Conrad Jennings.
Yeah, Janis, that's right.
For half a second, I thought you were going to say Conway Twitty. He had the sideburns to be a good race car, stock car driver.
Oh, he did, yeah. He sang a good country song, right?
Oh, could he?
Jesus. Anyway, so the NASCAR history is long, colorful, fun, and if you know where we came from, it makes it that much more interesting on where we got to. A third of the Fortune 500 companies are now involved in the sport, and it started out with just a bunch of guys, just wanted to see whose car was fastest, and you had old Raymond Parks, the big kingpin of illegal liquor up in Atlanta, who had an amusement company, which was jukeboxes and pinball machines and all that sort of thing. Well, he put that on the side of his car, and he got to write everything off. But his cars won the first NASCAR race and the first 2 NASCAR championships. So, right away, folks, businessmen realized that, hey, this is kind of neat. I can have fun and have the business pay for it and get a tax break. So it all just kind of progressed to where we are today. And once R.J. Reynolds came in 1971, Fortune 500 company said, wow, look at this, big bang for our advertising dollar. This is a heck of a deal. So it's taken baby steps all the way up to where we are today, but now it kind of sliding back down the stairs a little bit. We got to figure out a way to get it in the right direction and get it back up the stairs.
Well said. If I sat you down with a wheel, if we spun a wheel on a topic,
right,
racing topic,
sure,
you could do this all day.
Give it a shot. Let's have another show.
I got to get the wheel first, the spinning wheel.
Okay, and I won't even tell you about the monkey.
That's a difference. There he is.
Hey. Anyway, this has been an absolute joy. We are so thankful for the time that you've given us, and we hope you've enjoyed yourself, and I know our audience is going to love it.
Absolutely. Free. Who wouldn't come up here for free water?
Exactly. And ice.
Yeah,
yeah.
Well, they charge me for the ice. It's like going into a 7-Eleven and trying to get a cup of ice.
But you can see why he is not only famous, but beloved, too, right? So how about a big round of applause for Ken Willis, Daytona Beach News Journal. What a guy, what a
90
guy.
seconds.
The Legends of Racing radio show originates live from the very spot where beach racing began, Racing's North Turn Beach Bar and Grill. Join us next time for the Legends of Racing radio show with Buz McKim.
So what are you going to do the rest of the day?